Hello and welcome. I'm excited to invite you to the inaugural podcast of Creative Subconscious Conversations. The very first episode, we decided to make it as an introduction with my dear friend, with my dear colleague, Katya Bataeva, who has kindly came in to interview me. Before we start this series of Creative Subconscious Conversations, we decided to first introduce how did Creative Subconscious come about, as well as introduce my story. How did I create it? As the founder of Creative Subconscious, my journey has impacted the way this platform has developed and evolved over the last few years. So through my personal stories and my transitions and my journey, we will be sharing more about Creative Subconscious and what's to come as well. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I look forward to having all of you here for the future conversations that will be coming about on a regular basis here at Creative Subconscious. Hello, Katya.
Hi, Marina.
How are you?
I'm really good today, thank you. So, let me start. Yeah?
Yes.
Perfect. So, hi. I'm really excited for this talk today, for this interview with you, Marina. And I'm a big fan, and let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Katya. I'm a marketeer, project manager. I've been a marketeer my whole life. And for the past 3 years, I'm involved in educational projects and self-development. And I'm proudly trained as a coach and creative facilitator in Creative Subconscious method. And I really think that the world should know about you more. And I'm really excited to ask you some questions and listen to your story and find some new details. So let's start from the start and begin with introducing yourself. Could you introduce yourself, and how do you identify yourself? Who is Marina Kurikhina today?
Today, I am a creative facilitator. I'm a researcher. I'm an educator. I started my research into looking into connections between creativity and human potential, and it took me to very unusual places for sure. However, I remain I would say, creativity specialist who uses creativity and applies creative tools for personal growth to help people overcome their blockages, to get clarity, to restore. I find it to be one of the most powerful tools. I have been teaching for many, many years and gathered a lot of data and research, practical research, may I add. And for sure, my background in product design, I was 19 studying in London at Central St. Martin's, and that for sure at that age made me into a constant explorer and researcher and looking at everything from the design thinking perspective. And as an art historian in the past, as a curator, I worked for over 10 years with artists, and I always focused on their process. I trained as an artist myself and as a dancer, so there's a lot of different lives, I think, that led to this specific moment today where I'm at now. And my core belief is that creativity is the future. It's where innovation is at, as well as recovery. It's a very beautiful combination of innovation and resilience and integration. There's a lot there. I love how quick the process is when you involve creativity. And I love how self-sufficient and independent it is. It's available to everyone. Everyone can do that. It's very easy and it's very fun. So I am that person who carries this giant flag of creativity and saying, hey guys, this is way more fun and it's easier. Let's do this. Let's play.
Great, let's play. You kind of touched on all the questions I wanted to ask you in just one answer. So I'm like, okay, where do we go from here? But actually, I wanted to take a little dive into your life story, into your bio. And I know that you've been around art since your childhood. So I would like to know, like, how did it happen, and what kind of art were you around as a child, and were you, yeah, what was your environment like?
Wow. Okay, we're going this deep. Are you sure this is not a therapy session? This is really an interview podcast. um, I grew up. So let me just start that. I love looking at patterns. I believe that every story has a certain pattern, and that just like every person has an essence, right? A default essence that, yes, we experience life as certain series of situations. However, there's certain qualities that are there from the start, from the get-go, and that's what makes an essence of a person. And then we can look at the patterns and see what emerges from there. I would say the constant pattern in my life, if I look back, has been change, constant change. And I've been nomad from the birth, together with my family, and creativity. I grew up in a very creative household. My mother painted, created her own clothing. She's been a very creative entrepreneur as well. Doesn't matter where she would go, whether it was, she ended up in high economics and doing her master's, degree, and then applying that further in her dissertations. She was always an artist. She always approached it from a very creative mindset. And creativity, just FYI, creativity means ability to see things from different perspectives. And whatever situations that invites you in, whether, like Einstein used to go on a walk to the forest or play his music and think about the situations that he was exploring presently. And we've seen where that has taken him to. So this is really the essence of creativity. And I've seen my parents do it from an early start, from the early stage. And one of my favorite memories is my mom and my dad in the evening doing their own thing. My mom was painting an icon, which I think it was mother and child subject, which is a classic subject in most of the, art history paintings. But she was doing it in her own way. She was taking her own take on that. In the meantime, my dad was making a little piece of furniture for me. I was about 5 years old, and he was painting the little stool he created in this really traditional pattern. And so that was my favorite thing, because both my father and my mother were creative in their own right. And the household, we always had incredible music. My dad was very much an engineer mind who was gifted with his hands. So he could make clothing for me. He could build furniture. I had all the furniture built by my dad. He would also document and film whenever we had access to the cameras, because mind you, that was Kazakhstan in the 90s. I was born in Siberia.
Wow.
Both my parents grew up in Siberia, and then they relocated to Kazakhstan for some projects, and that's where I went to kindergarten. So again, I was already in this intersection of different cultures. Kazakhstan is a Muslim culture. It's a nomadic culture. We lived in the middle of nowhere. So my memories is growing up with mixed kids, racially mixed kids, in this really odd culture of sort of breakaway Soviet, post-Soviet reality, at the same time having traditions. I've seen early on traditional nomadic tribes, being in steppes. And then, we moved to Moscow, where I spent about 7 years. And again, I changed a lot of different schools there. I went to art school in Moscow. I studied with really interesting professors. I did ballroom dancing. I did all sorts of things. And my mother's second marriage, and my second father, was a producer. He was an actor. He was a theater person, a major theater person, very, very talented. And he was also a very spiritual person. He still is a very spiritual person. In fact, he went into religious route afterwards. And growing up with him, it was like being in constant creative process. Whether we were driving somewhere together, he would play different operas, and he would, you know, would watch unusual films, and he would comment on the acting. I remember, and that really felt like a torture. I had to learn by heart different poems, different poetry, and have and recite them, you know, in front of others. I had to read Shakespeare, and we discuss it intensely. So it's when you grow up with, he was also a director. When you grow up with a film and theater director, you are like in a whole different world over there. And I don't know if it's a good thing or if it's a bad thing. I'm not sure. There's a lot of, how would I say, traumatic situations that I'm still unpacking. But at the same time, he taught me from an early on, what is it like to be around creative people? What does a creative life looks like? And I think further down in life, when I was working as a curator in London, and I worked with many different international artists, I got on really well with artists. I understood their concept. I was able to see something that I think would be difficult for a lot of people, because creative people are quite complex, but they're very beautiful as well. And I think the ability to see their beauty and ability to keep the compassion and empathy as to, no, wait a second, I know this is very unusual what this person is saying, but let me just try to see the world through their eyes. Let me see, why is it so important to them right now? What is that vision that they're so desperate or passionate about? Why do they want everybody to see that, right? So we become co-creators together with them. And that curiosity, I think, is definitely something that came through by being surrounded from an early age in my childhood by these complex characters called parents. And for sure, I went to high school in Scotland, and then, you know, went to art school in London. I lived in Mexico. I specialized in Latin American art for many years. I worked as an international curator. Like, I flew all over the world, working in Brazil. I worked in Paris. My first show, I actually created my first show in Paris, and it was a fun story, but maybe that's a whole different question that I'm going away from here. But yeah, definitely a nomad, definitely explorer, definitely early in the creative world with super sensitive people.
Yeah, thank you. So what stood out for me is indeed the change, the creativity, and kind of multiculturality, multi-dimensionality, if I can say it like this.
Yeah,
and
you're absolutely right.
Yeah, what I wanted to ask you is that, so you've been around art since your childhood, and you've been creative and exploring yourself creatively. So does it mean that one should be creative since childhood to be creative? Like, it's a nature versus nurture kind of question. Can creativity be developed, and that discernment, that nuanced vision, can it be developed?
I mean, we're all born creative. I've never seen a child who says, oh no, I'm not going to make that drawing because I'm not creative enough. They're like, drawing, colors, yeah, bring it on. And it's not just drawing. That's another fact. Creativity has different forms and shapes. And I have seen that in gardeners. I have seen that in accountants. I have seen that in lawyers. I've seen it in business people. I remember sitting at a dinner party, and at the time I was working with the artist as a curator, and this guy, I think he was in banking, he turns around to me, he's like, do you think I could be an artist in my Excel sheets? Because I really think I'm so creative and I really love this. He's like, I totally reinvented the system and the way those Excel sheets works, and I'm so great. And I thought, wow, this is, I don't know, can I answer this? Right now I can definitely answer and say yes. Creativity is available to absolutely everyone. This is something we forget as we grow up because our society is very logical, and we live in a society that celebrates logic and rationality. However, we also creatures that go to bed and have dreams. we're also non-linear creatures. And I think when we try to disconnect from it, we lose a major part of who we are. And I think playing, when we go into play, you can sort of see that creativity, that curiosity, that engagement that reawakens. And that is very much back in the childhood. And I'm going to come back to the essence that I was talking about. We all have a certain essence, and it's there already as when we're kids. So I actually just had a session with a client who is extraordinarily successful at what she does. She's, Harvard MBA, runs regenerative projects, really, really does good for the world. She's exhausted and burned out. And she says, Marina, I'm running it in exact same way as if I'm still in New York or LA, running my law firm. She says, I can't do this anymore. I'm burning myself out. And we did a series of exercises, creative practices. We did the creative subconscious method, of course, and we arrived to exactly the part that renourishes her, that restores her. Because the idea is, of course, not to just cut yourself out, right? And just be like, okay, what we don't want to happen, we don't want to just burn out and forever leave the life that we have. No, what we want to do, we want to find a way that restores us the quickest and the most efficient, right? And it's already there. So when we found that part of herself, which was a sort of very nerdy scientist that got lost somewhere there, right? As she was growing up, she remembers, she's like, oh my gosh, as a child, this was my dream. I used to play to be a nature scientist. And it doesn't mean that she has to become necessarily a nature scientist, but we've created a space for that, where she recovers really, really fast when she brings that persona in her life. And I believe that is the creative part of herself that's waking up, that has ideas, that has answers. And it is a non-linear part. It's not logical, which is why for the conscious mind and for the rational society and conditioning that we come from, which is great, but it's hard to understand. It's like these two parts speak different language. So my point is, just because they speak different language and don't necessarily understand each other doesn't mean that they have to cancel each other out. And that's what I think creativity is about enhancing all the different parts of yourself that you have and bringing it into wholeness and creating a space where you use all the type of intelligence that are available to you.
Thank you. Yeah, and I want to reflect back on a couple of points here. So first, what resonated is when you said that creativity comes in many shapes and forms, and it's not something preset. So I remember being frustrated about, not being creative. I was like, I'm doing this project management, marketing, but marketing is creative actually. And then I thought, my creativity comes in this form of creating structure and, creating like a beautiful, well-organized structure where I see that it's my work, it's my creation. And then I was like, this is creativity. Okay, I'm fine. That's the first thing. And another one is that actually discovering your practices from my first workshop with you, then the group that you did and the coaching course, I have really rediscovered that non-linear part and deepened my connection to that inner magician that some might know me, my nickname. And and it was a really great discovery. And actually the part that was present in my childhood was super embodied, and I would do just random dances for my grandparents and great-grandparents. And that dance was my language of creativity when I was little. And I also rediscovered that thanks to the practices. So
this is exciting. I mean, do you remember, does anyone else dance in your family? Do you remember where did that come from?
No, actually nobody. But
Well,
I
there
had
you are.
musicians, like my great grandmother played violin, but no dancers. And I was a spontaneous dancer since childhood, since early childhood. But
Well, that's exactly it. So my question is like, as kids, we already have it there. We don't know where it comes from, but it's just that that's the essence. And I think when we reconnect to that essence, when we remember that, we reconnect to a part of ourselves and certain strength that gives extraordinary power and wisdom at the same time. And I think
indeed,
without it, we are not complete. We're not whole. And there's
yeah,
this longing that shows up in many different ways and sometimes makes us act in ways that maybe, that are not so clear or not so even healthy.
yeah. And also, you mentioned a couple of times the term non-linear, and I had a conversation with my partner recently, and I was saying something blah blah non-linear, and he said, "I noticed how much you like that term, how much you use it." And I told him, "Yeah, I discovered it with Marina, but to me it makes so much sense, and it's such a precise word that I really know what it means. I feel it, but maybe it's not so obvious for." Everyone, like, what is linear and non-linear to you? How can you define that?
Well, I think another way of saying it would be sequential and non-sequential. If we look at art, it's figurative and abstract. If we look into physics, it would be, we have classical physics and then we have quantum. It's basically when things are not in logical or rational order, where everything is possible, and just, I would say it's a space of possibilities, the non-linear. It's a space of not knowing, but it's almost not knowing because it's forming. And we don't know the route, what would be the best route, but it's process based. So it will find the best possible route and solution through the given circumstances that are only possible to know in the moment as they are unfolding. So to me, it's actually a much more realistic way, and a way more rational, to be honest, to deal with things. Because we don't know, we never really know what is going to be in a given situation, but we can respond to what is arising. And there is non-linearity today. It's non-linear, it's unpredictable in a way. But it's unpredictable. It's a predictable unpredictable, if you know what I mean. I am consciously choosing that, hence the predictability. And there's a certain trust in me knowing that I am able to respond. It's a very grown-up position to be in. I take full responsibility, and I trust in my ability to deal with what's arising. I know what I want, so I'm going towards, I'm not like aimlessly wandering somewhere. No. I'm very clear about what I want. However, I want to find the best possible solution in the given circumstances. But since circumstances are changing all the time, therefore, I'm just going to deal with it moment by moment in a non-linear way. Which non-linear doesn't seem obvious from the outside. I'm not going to be able to tell you, first we're going to do this and this and this. I can outline more or less the desire. But how we're going to get there, we'll decide the best route once we're there. Let's cross that bridge when we get there, right?
It resonates deeply, and it's exactly what's happening right now, because I have a set of questions that I want to ask you, and I have this kind of structure inside my brain, in my mind, like I have an outline, but then as we speak, I'm like, okay, this is what I'm curious about right now. And let me just grab that, because I want to go deeper into like what is nonlinear, but still exactly as you described. I do have this understanding of what I want, and also the ability and the flexibility to react to whatever's arising, and trust the process. So it's exactly what's going on for me right now.
Well, how about if I tell you that it's very good to have a plan, because it creates a certain clarity of what you want. And it's important to know your direction, right? It's important to know which mountain you want to climb, because you don't want to, as Joseph Campbell used to say, you don't want to climb a mountain, get to the top and realize that was the wrong mountain you got to. However, what if I tell you that once you know where you want to go, you can relax into it and just go towards that direction. And whatever you encounter is not something that you will know, but it's absolutely what you need to encounter in order to get there. And you will not know how to solve it until you are there in the moment. But you absolutely have all the capacity and all the knowledge and resources available to you to deal with it. And you will. And I think that sort of trust and that sort of knowing is extremely valuable. And if we remember fairy tales, just something Einstein would also say, you know, it's just like, how do we get smarter? Mr. Einstein, read fairy tales. How do we get as smart as you are? Read more fairy tales, right? That's the anecdote about Einstein. And that's kind of the myth that we're living. It's all about the unknown and trusting.
And that makes me think about the coaching course that I took, your coaching course, and that's like one of the main muscles that you help your students grow over time. And I really love it. Like, this skill is so valuable in life, and just being present and being able to trust the process and be able to react. And
react or respond? Which one? Exactly. You want to be able to respond. There's nothing wrong with reaction. I mean, you learn about yourself when you get reactive. It's like, oh, why did I get reactive over here? Oh, I still need to do some work. Great. We can grow. Amazing. However, when you're responding, it's just much more of an adult position. Is the experience having you, or are you having the experience, right? As my teacher used to say. Yeah. And that course, you know, I wouldn't be able to put it together if I were to imagine and think, okay, this is how the coaching courses needs to be. I looked at the environment. This is where design thinking comes in. I looked at it like, what is the landscape that we live in today? Right? And what is needed and what is not being done? What is missing right now? Hence why we have so many different unusual, I would say, modules. You know, we have psychedelic integration, or we have an extraordinary arts therapist who comes in. Because, like, how do you deal with the whole psychedelic renaissance that's happening right now? How can you have a client who comes in after a massive trip of whatever it is they decided to take, hence the unknown? This is going to be a non-linear session for sure. But if you know nothing, if you don't understand what happens with the nervous system, you know, you're not going to be able to do it. Like, I had somebody signed up with me a package to, we worked on her career. She really wanted to come back, after having a child, and she arrived with a weekend of huge dose of psychedelic tripping, and I was like, we're halfway through. We're not going to be able to continue. However, what can we do with this? How can we work with that? I was able to respond and turn it into opportunity, right? And so things like that, creating programs that are relevant today, is again, it's non-linear approach in a way. It's like we live in the age like AI right now. I'm so excited to add another module to the program. It's like, you have ChatGPT. How can we use it as an opportunity? How can you help your clients or the people, your communities, or who you're working with? Because that is an amazing resource. And if we don't use it, then we're not going to be able to catch up. And at the same time, going back to the classics of embodiment, there's, as Carl Rogers, the humanistic psychology that we look at, brilliant. Guys, if you ever want to start, any of you who's listening, look at the Carl Rogers and his educational systems. This is where it is all at. All you need to understand. And Peter Levine as well. So those are my two go-tos. But, going back to Carl Rogers is like, we have a self-regulating organism. We have a system, a beautiful, brilliant design that works, can self-regulate by itself. All we got to do is to create conditions of safe space, of where you feel met as a human being, and really where you have space to be heard, to be witnessed, where you're not told that there's something broken, because nothing is actually broken. And absolutely everyone has the capacity to sort it out. You just need a space to do that, a specific type of place. But I think this is the type of core that will never change, no matter what you do. If you're working with people, if you want successful relationships, if you want to be a great leader, this is where it starts. And yes, a lot of the times we'll look and say, this is compassion, this is empathy. Yes. But how do we get there? How does it look like in very practical terms? I'm a very practical, researcher. It's like, okay, we have the material. What are we going to do? The reason I didn't become a therapist and I wanted to be a coach, because it's practical. It's like, okay, we figured this thing out. Now, how is it going to look in your life? How does it look like as a project? How can you implement it? Let's be practical, right? Because then it's evidence-based, then it's lived experience. And this is what we're here for at the end of the day. We want to live lives that are here on earth, not somewhere else. So if we're going to do an arrival practice, it's so that we can show up here. So this is one of my goals. It's like, yes, let's go out there and discover it, and let's freaking live and enjoy it. This is a beautiful planet.
Indeed. There's so much richness in what you're saying. So I'm like, okay, there are like tons of thoughts that I want to further unravel. And yeah, first I wanted to comment back on that not needing to fix anything part, because I've been leading sessions and guided meditations. And this specific part, when I say there's nothing to be fixed, you don't need to make anything perfect or enhance anything. I got a lot of very positive feedback just specifically about that part. People are like, oh my God, could I do this all along? Like, is it true? And yeah, this kind of presence and just witnessing what is, not needing to change anything, is super, super valuable. But okay, if you want to say something. Well, I have a question.
I can go on a long one, so just
I know.
just tell me your question.
The question is, and we haven't really spoken about it and haven't shared personally about it. And you said that you included psychedelic integration into the coaching course, but is it just this response to the renaissance of psychedelics, as you said, or is it something more? Like, do you consider psychedelics a part of self-exploration journey, an essential part, or what's your personal take on this? What's your view?
I mean, that's a loaded question. I think, without responding necessarily to my personal experiences, I would say that it would be absolutely ignorant today not to pay attention to psychedelic therapy field. It is happening. It's been happening for a long time. It's becoming more legalized. And whether it is open or not open, people are doing it. And so it's not so much my personal response as to like, what do I think about it or not? The facts are, it's here, and it's been part of some of the history, innovation history for so many people. If I were to explore it through my research, when I met Stanislav Grof, who started with psychedelic therapy at the Esalen Institute, and he did research in sort of other institutions as well. And then he came into breath work, and he developed the holotropic breath work. So listening to his lectures, I went to his lectures in California. I met him. I did his workshops. I met his students. What was interesting to me is altered states, flow states, expanded state of consciousness, or whatever. You can call them in different ways, and there are different levels of that. You can take psychedelics. Of course, it's like completely different. Depends on what you take. You can go into meditation. People go for run, or they do different sports. People dream state as an altered state, Creativity is an altered state. We get into a certain flow. And so the reason why this is interesting to me, and I think this is where it is relevant in my research and my science-based approach, dare say I, is these altered states bring us to this non-linearity, that what's naturally there for us, to that subconscious, unconscious mind, call it whatever you want. And I think it's necessary to go there. When we're using substances, I think it's important to understand what do they do to us, because we have not grown up in a culture that acknowledges the nonlinear or the altered states or the non-ordinary states. And one of our teachers, Jennifer, who's teaching the psychedelic integration, she would say, if you look at the tribes, indigenous tribes, they don't understand, like, why do you have altered states or non-ordinary states? It's like, this is ordinary. This is part of our reality. So they are able to negate between the two. This is part of their culture. They're connected to the nature. They're in tune. They understand both. And this is something we don't have. And I think that's why there has been such renaissance, because these states bring us to something else, to something bigger, to a part of ourselves, the undercurrent, that is major part, that holds a lot of answers, that connects us to something incredibly deep, incredibly nourishing. And you can use creative process for that. You can use psychedelics for that. You can use dance for that, or breath work. You can do meditation. There are many different routes, whatever works for you. And of course, there's another side to also psychedelics, and there's more research. If you look at the maps in California, they've been doing it for years. There's just some trauma work, PTSD, that fear of death, terminal illnesses. There's that can be worked through and has been done so, and help people to realize, to not be afraid, to overcome that just regular therapy would never do. And why wouldn't we do that for people? That's what we're here for. And of course, again, I'm gonna reiterate, and one of the main reasons I have this module is to bring more awareness, more education. How do you work with this? What does it mean? I believe in bringing information and then letting people to make their choices, because everyone is an adult, everyone is responsible for themselves. But if you're going to make a choice, if you're going to make a decision, make it an informative one. Once you know everything, it's okay to choose whatever you want to choose, but make sure it's conscious. Make sure you know, so you can make the most out of it.
Thank you. Yeah, so same things you were saying about non-linear states in general. Same goes here, like knowing what you're doing, why you're doing this, and yeah, setting and
Oh my
tension,
gosh.
integration.
And that's the truth is, that's another reason why I love the psychedelic module that we have. I mean, we have a lot of different, we look at the epigenetics. I absolutely love that. We look into somatic awareness, you know, a lot of the work of Peter Levine, definitely creativity. We look at the also early forms of therapy as well, which is, you know, which is basically shamanism. So, but not from the woo perspective. We look at it from a science-based perspective because there's so much evidence at this stage. However, what I love about psychedelic therapy approach is that they actually got it right in terms of set and the setting. Creating safe space, integration, witnessing. It's so clear there. And this is what I don't understand. That should be for protocol for any work with anyone, whether you take psychedelics or not. That is how serious this is. And I don't think this is happening. But when it does happen in this way, the set and the setting, these serious protocols, when therapists, coaches, facilitators show up according to that protocol, I find that the results are incredible for both, for whoever is working with the person and for the client. And I think there's an integrity there that should be implemented everywhere.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
So I want to take a step back into your career as an art curator. And I know that you've been exploring artists' creative processes. And what were the major things that you have discovered? Were they creative processes similar or different? And what did you take out of that work, and what you use further now? How did you implement it into your method?
Oh, there's a lot there, and it's never ending. I tell you that. If you take me to a museum, or if you come with me to a museum or an art gallery, it opens up this never-ending love affair. And this is my relationship with arts in general. I find that art is a great reflection of who we are. You can look at the same artwork if you have a connection with it, and you can throughout your life see different things in it. The same like with books. Some books you read and you're like, when I read it when I was 17, I never seen that part. You know, when I was reading, one of my favorites is Master Margarita by Bulgakov, and I was like, I've never seen that side of it. You know, it's the book that I read all my life, on and off, and I always find new parts. But what is the same with any painting? When I look at Caravaggio, you know, there's a piece that I absolutely love in Dresden, and I remember looking at it, and there was a moment when I saw the depth and multi-dimensionality that it offers. I get to see different things all the time. But what's changing is not the work of art, not the book. The book is the same. The painting is the same. The process, I am changing. So it's a beautiful way to see and to track yourself. And this is what I've seen in the artistic process as well. And when working with artists, I loved so much their vulnerability, and I think that's what they taught me, because it's incredibly courageous to go within and put your vision out there and find whatever materials, whether you're using sculpture or whether you're creating installations, whether you're doing Andy Warhol style or Duchamp ready-mades, whatever, sound, body, movement, whatever is your art form. I find it so brave to go out there, to express yourself, and then put it in front of other people and say, this is it. And that vulnerability, I think I learned from artists. It's that courageous. Are they scared? Absolutely. They're incredibly sensitive beings, like all of us. All of us, it's like if you were to do what they're doing, you would feel the same way. And you can do the same thing also, by the way. So there's vulnerability. And then the other thing is the courage to see that over and over again, no matter how much they suffer, they're willing to show up. They're willing to go further. And I really respect that. And then I also felt it was such a gift and such a privilege to be let inside of someone else's vision. When someone says, hey, this is how I see the world. This is my sensibility, this is my experience. I felt incredibly lucky. I felt like in that moment, I was the luckiest person on earth to see the way they experience, the way they sense, what they pick up. And I see it's the same thing with all my clients. Because as you know, I believe everyone is an artist, everyone is a creator. But to get to see their experience of life in whichever form, let's say your format is marketing, as you were saying, or, for somebody else, it might be cooking or opening up restaurants. For somebody else, it might be figuring it out, figuring who they are. Essentially, that's what this life is for. And when they let you in to that journey, especially when they're lost, they're like, okay, I'm really freaking lost, but this is how I see things. That is a creative process. That is a creation of your life as you're getting on with it. And I feel incredibly lucky. I learned so much. I get inspired. I realize that how everyone is so unique. I had one artist who wouldn't eat before she would create an artwork. She would
how long?
She would fast. I don't know. She would do like 48, 24-hour fast. And then right before she would wake up at like this 4 a.m. And she was like, that was the most, she was referring to altered state. That was the most when her inner critic and her conscious mind, her linear mind, right, her logic, rational, was switched off. And she didn't really fully had control of anything. And she would just paint. She would just create. But before that, she had a shot on espresso and a cigarette. And she wouldn't normally smoke, by the way. So just to push herself extra. And yeah, the works that she created were extraordinary. She's still going with it. And you felt it in the work. I had another artist who would just go around Mexico City, and he's like, this city is so crazy, it's so mad. And he would just document as a visual diary of all the craziness that he could never imagine. So he was just witnessing it, right? He was becoming one with the city, with the environment, and just let himself absorb it. And then he would go back to his studio and he would create these incredible installations, very precarious structures that would be based on balance through random objects. They would be beautiful, they would be very funny. In fact, I did a show with him in London. Imagine experience. Imagine me having access to these stories. I felt privileged, and I still see it, like I feel the same when I talk to my clients and they tell me, I've seen this, and in a way it's how do I say it? I help them to translate it as well. I help them to let's say we have a sort of artist studio visit, right, with somebody who arrives and they tell me their life story, what they want to work on. Then we look at where they're stuck. So we look at what they have in a studio. We'll look at their process. What is the material they're working with, right? And then we're like, okay, you have all of this. What type of exhibition you want to have? Basically, what type of life you want to have? What do you want to create? And then together, I try to understand their vision and get them to express their unique voice from their place of essence. And that's what I did with artists. I was like, remember, this is who you are. Remember when you walked through the streets of Mexico and this is what inspired you? How is it reflecting in this exhibition? How is it reflecting in this piece and in this series? And sometimes they would be scared. They're like, I have this idea, Marina, and I really don't know if I can do this. And I'd be like, okay, let's see. Let's go for it. And so I feel like I'm still doing the whole thing with artists, just with people who are artists. They just forgot that they are.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, there are so many similarities of coaching work with what you have described in your process with artists. And what stood out for me is that there was so much intimacy, and if I can say this, yeah, intimacy and being present with their process. And yeah, another thing is that life is a canvas in a way, and so you just continue doing that work. And yeah, touching upon that thing you said about figuring out who are you. And I know that you work a lot with people in transitions, in career changes, and support them through these periods of their lives. And I know you had a major transition in your own life. As far as I know, like based on what I know about you, that it was one of the, yeah, most important turnaround points in your life. And we spoke about it recently, that you had this beautiful, amazing career anyone could dream of as a curator, but then you changed it and you let it go, and you ended up in Esalen Institute peeling potatoes at first. How did that happen, and what wasn't working for you? How did you take that leap?
Wow, this is a therapy session.
That's what I do.
Yeah, I trained you well. So that story, huh? We're gonna go there.
I mean, you don't need to go into any super personal details, but what makes a person, change something that seems so perfect to something else? Like, what was that urge, the desire? Maybe it can help and support other people who are experiencing something similar right now.
Well, I'm happy to share the story, and then you tell me. I hope it'll be helpful, inspiring to others. If it's not, I'm also okay with that. So when you were saying the transition, the change, I was like, that my whole life is one big transition. I mean, I just moved another country again. I'm a serial mover and cultural mutant at this stage. Okay, so here's the story. I was living in London. I spent about 10 years building up to be in a place, in a career as a curator where I was in a good place. I was working with incredible people. I traveled around the world. I had the most perfect, beautiful apartment in London with a garden and a fireplace, and I mean, you name it. And I had a relationship. I was with someone who ticked all the right boxes. I did everything I was told. How would I even say it? There's almost like in my mind, there's an imaginary list where it's like, if you tick all those boxes, you're going to be happy, right? And we have this, at this stage, I'd call it social conditioning. It's like, yeah, you have the perfect guy, you have the perfect relationship, and I know so many of my clients are feeling the same way. But basically, I got there and I was like, I'm miserable. This does not feel good. And my body started to deteriorate as well. I started to have really strong reactions sort of to everything I would eat. I couldn't understand what was going on. And at this stage, I also had a coach, and I don't think she could fully see or help me, and I don't think I was ready, to be honest, to do this. Which is why, I do focus on people with transitions in their lives, because this is something I lived and went through successfully in the end. When I left to LA, to California from London, so I realized I was like, something has to be changed. This is not working. So I left, and again in LA, in Los Angeles, I arrived and I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I had the perfect apartment, I had the relationship, I had everything one would possibly dream about. And yet I was my most miserable. I totally had no idea who I was. I felt so disillusioned that I've made so much effort, and yet I still couldn't figure things out. I felt like a failure. Yeah, it was extraordinarily hard. I ended up at the Esalen Institute of Human Potential in Big Sur on a course called Depletion. And at that stage, the partner I was with in a relationship, he actually said, is like, you've got to figure it out. You've got to sort it out. This is not okay. And so he helped me to get there. He drove me to Big Sur. And so at the Esalen Institute, I enrolled in a program called Depletion. It's like, this is great. This is for me. Because I thought, it was such a nonstop career. And by the way, can we just take a pause and take a note that most of the things that look glamorous and beautiful from the outside, because we live in a society that actually shows all these pretty pictures, on the other side, a lot of the times, it's the opposite. My job, my career looked incredible. My life looked, if I look back in my life, I think, oh, wow, this is so much fun. This is so interesting. I was exhausted. These flights, constant traveling actually ruins your health. Can we just say that? The amount of people I had to deal with, there was no space for myself. It's really not healthy. And yes, we shouldn't glamorize hustle culture that we live in. However, it's with everything. Things are not what they really seem. And sometimes the most boring and unexciting actually is the most nourishing. It's the silence. It's the internal process. It's an inside job for majority of the things and of the challenges that we deal in life. And when there's too much going on externally, there's no time and space for that inside job. And this is what I learned when I came to Esalen, because that was the first time when I could stop. I lived in nature. I've never lived in nature before. I'm a city girl, except for my early childhood Kazakhstan situation. But my conscious life has been always in major cities. And so I've never actually paused and was like, oh, look at the ocean. Oh, look at the tree. I don't have to rush anywhere. I don't have any appointments, And in exchange for being there, I had to work. And so I chosen to work in a kitchen because it was the closest to the crazy schedule that I was used to. Because kitchen is the only place that works they have to serve 3 meals a day. It's like you have to provide. I think at that time they were serving for 300 people. So I still got my rush, and I'm still a productive junkie that needs to be busy, but in a much more balanced way, of course. So I was peeling those carrots or potatoes or whatever that was. And I was thinking, Jesus, I'm really happy. Like, what is going on? Like, I am not at some fancy cocktail party selling $300,000 painting. I am here in the middle of nowhere, peeling potatoes, doing process with people. We had Gestalt process about, once a week. Then I had once a week with my student group process. Again, group psychology is a whole different level. And this was my early training where I really learned how it should be done. And then we had to check in regularly with our kitchen staff, then with students. Then basically I was in constant process. And then I was studying as well. I was studying anatomy, human self-regulating systems. I was in nature. I was doing private work as well. And I thought, I'm not being seen. I'm not being part of any sort of society that I'm so used to being part of. And I finally could catch a breath. And so I ended up staying there longer. I ended up actually going for something that scared so much. Everything was scary there. Everything. I was like, my parents thought that I'm in some sort of sect. I did and confronted some of the things I thought I would never do. And I was like, what is happening here? But I went for it. And when I came back, I remember my partner looking at me and saying, I don't know who you are.
Gives me goosebumps. Wow.
Yeah. And this was me finally feeling, this is who I am. And mind you, I didn't run around. I didn't do anything crazy. You know, I didn't even meditate on a daily basis. I just felt so alive. And I came back and I felt extremely happy and connected. And I remember he said, I don't know who you are. You're not the woman that I met. And that's where I think my journey began. So it takes some of the harder moments in life to wake up. When we lose something that is dear to us, sometimes it's divorce, sometimes it's the death of a loved one, sometimes it's losing your job or losing absolutely everything. I think I've had most of those things happening to me, except for the death of a loved one. Although I have people who passed that I deeply care for, but everyone in my family, it's fine. Touch the wood. And that was a big awakening moment because I was in a country where I think I had one friend. I was out of job because I left my job in London, and I thought, well, this relationship is obviously ending. And I didn't have anything to fall back on. So I found a job and I thought, I can always go back. Let me just see what I can do here. Worst comes to worst, London is always there. I have my support base there. That's okay. Let me try to figure this out. So I rented a room in the apartment of Venice Boulevard. I found this super cheap room. I made it super cute. And got a job, really interesting project. And I was still hoping and experimenting. Maybe I can do that. There was a cultural project. It was a lot of programming to do with, cultural institutions, museums. It was a mix between my old and sort of the new that I was stepping into. And I gave it a shot, and I thought, I made a promise to myself that I'm going to do the opposite of everything that I thought was right. Because when I did things that I thought were right, that I was told right, I've betrayed myself. And it brought me to the results that were not mine. It was not something that made me happy. It actually did the opposite. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do the opposite of this. If it scares me, if it's something I would never do, then this is exactly what I'm going to do. And that changed my life, that approach. That's how I ended up going back to Esalen Institute. I ended up being in relationships and friendships and job situations with people that I would probably never ever do, but it felt right and it felt really scary. And I was like, would I do this? Would the old Marina do this? And the answer was like, she would never do this. I was like, okay, I'm doing this. We have to change. This isn't working. And I think I lost quite a lot of people. But what was interesting at the same time, that filtered out a lot of people who were not aligned in my life. And those who remain, those friendships and those relationships, they're still going strong today. And they're the people who really knew me and knew my essence, again, going back to the core essence and authentic connections. Those people always knew who I was. And they stayed throughout, no matter how lost I was, no matter how disconnected I felt. They were there for all of that, and they're still here. So it was an incredible moment. It was probably one of the harder moments of my life. And there were more to come in that, obviously, because making the decisions and choices that you would never make means that you don't really know what you're doing. So you kind of have to figure it out as you're going along. And, that comes with mistakes, and that comes with, some sort of baptism by fire. And yeah, there's a lot of story in that period, but that's where creative subconscious had emerged. Because in that, I had nothing to lose, and I could see what was true to me. If there's nothing to lose, nobody cares. Yeah.
My next question, actually, because I don't know the story about how creative subconscious has emerged. Like, when did you ideate this? When did this idea come to your mind, and how? And how did you choose the name for it? I don't know it, but I'm super curious now.
Sure. Creative subconscious came out of Esalen Institute, my time at Esalen Institute in Big Sur. And I think of Esalen as a think tank for new thought, human potential movements, personal growth, spirituality as well, psychology. You know, it's an intersections between science, psychology, spirituality, and whatever other modalities that fall into it. It's a place to experiment. It's a sort of incubator, I would even say, that has been there since the 60s and 70s, and throughout had different thought leaders, different psychologists, and innovators in the field coming through. There's a lot of artists and writers. And this is one of my values, is diversity and transdisciplinary. This is very much part of my background, my upbringing. This is what I bring in my work. And this is where I believe the future is. So when I was at Esalen and I was studying all these different modalities, or all these different sciences, and new researches that are not that new, but relatively new in terms of human history, or at least for this reiteration of civilizations that we have. And as I was studying Gestalt and group psychology and doing process or somatic awareness, or as I was doing all these different 5-rhythm dance, or, body awareness, or there's such thing as Esalen massage that comes from also psychology and Gestalt and Rolfing. It's just like a combination of all these geniuses, that shared their thoughts and their beliefs when they were at Esalen. And so when I was looking at all this, and you could turn around and see Stanislav Grof sitting around the corner, or I could turn around this way and see a direct, lineage, somebody who studied with Fritz Perls, one of the founders of Gestalt. Whatever convoluted reputation he's got, he's an incredible practitioner, and he impacted and informed some of the most important movements that we have today in coaching, in therapy. So I started to notice patterns, that there's a certain part that they focus on, all these different practices. And that part, of course, is the authentic self. But they would go to a certain state of that authentic self, or like a certain state to connect to that authentic self, that I realized is very similar to what all the artists did. And I was like, wait a second, I know this. I have seen this. This has happened in the studios of artists. I know this as an art historian, studying and learning about, different processes of different artists. You could see it in Kandinsky's paintings. Malevich would talk about it. I mean, it's really all there. So what I realize is that actually the curatorial work that I've been doing, or all the arts movements that I've seen, is as much of part human potential movements as everything else, as all the other psychology processes or movements, or all these different modalities. It's the same thing. And that's what artists do, actually. It's a self-exploration tool, and that made me realize that I'm completely at home, and I've been here all along. And so they've invited me at Esalen to do a little workshop on a weekly basis, And I thought, okay, well, what am I going to do? Can I approach it as a researcher, as an art historian? And at this stage, I've had several years under my belt in group process and in studying, different therapies. So I thought, well, let me just combine these two things. So I looked at whatever surrealists did, whatever the exercise and practices. I looked at abstract expressionists. I looked at so many different artists and saw what they were really doing is not necessarily the painting or the sculpture. It was about connecting in that process to who they were. And I thought, well, let me introduce it to everybody else, because that I know for a fact that's available to everybody else. That's what we've been doing in all of our group sessions, It's the same thing that the reason why people go to Esalen massage, for example, is to drop into that place of knowing, to drop into that place of, again, inspiration and connection and self-witnessing. And all of it is available through creative process. And here the exercises that all these super famous artists that were so important in the development of the art history in the 20th century, they were doing this all along. So why don't we all just do it together? And so this is what I've done. I played around, and this is what I call the practical research. And at the beginning I thought, oh my God, these people are going to realize that I'm total fake, that I have no idea what I'm doing. They're going to kick me out. Of course, I had like the major imposter syndrome, but I had a lot of support. And at Esalen, there's this lady called Dawn, and she was responsible for programming. And she was like, nope, you're doing it. I know you can. I believe in you. Go out there and do it. I was like, but how? And she said, no, you already know. Off you go. So again, I had the set and the setting.
And support.
And what happened is this thing not only worked, it became quite popular. Like I had to turn people away sometimes. And it really helped a lot of different people to unlock their creativity, to get answers to something they were stuck with. It helped them to overcome certain struggles or to confront things that were too scary, because once they put it on a paper, it was less intimidating and they could address it or they could move with it. And so I threw also in that process everything that I have learned in terms of the process, in terms of psychology techniques and practices and the witnessing. Yeah, and that's creative subconscious. And they were asking me like, what is it? I was like, well, it's creativity and I'm tapping into the subconscious mind. So it's really not dealing with your ordinary everyday here. So it's creative subconscious. And that was the name of the class. And it just continued to be so to this day.
Thank you. So we have time for one last question.
Sure.
Yeah, and I thought about like breaking the rules of the interview and asking you like, what do you think the last question should be? But actually, maybe you can share what's your vision for creative subconscious? What do you want to create further? How do you see yourself developing further?
Definitely a session over here. Look, I know that creativity and creative process is extremely powerful. And I don't know why it has not been explored as much or utilized or applied in all the different fields to help people, to support them. I don't know why. It's extremely fun. It's very easy. It works. It's so effective. And so this is really my mission. My dream is to see creativity and creative process to be available, to demystify it, and to make it available to as many people as possible so they can become self-sufficient, independent. They can tap into that inner knowing, into that inner mentor that is available, inner artist, call it whatever you want. but give these tools to help them to cultivate and to access the different intelligence that is available to everyone, and to break those stereotypes. None of it is controversial. All of it is science-based. All of it is very practical. And it's about not bypassing. It's about dealing efficiently with the problem at hand, so that you can live your life to your full potential as easy as possible and have fun with it. Thrive. That's really what I see creative subconscious doing and becoming. And I don't know, this is the goal. This is the intention. Let's see where it's going to take us.
Yeah, maybe one practical tip for somebody who's watching or listening. How can one tap into their creativity on a daily basis? Or you can refer to, I know what you can do, but maybe like, yeah, what can I do first thing in the morning or throughout the day, whether I'm, in my thoughts and feeling super linear, how can I tap into the non-linear?
There are many different processes, but I would say staying curious and remembering, if you can remember that there are several solutions to one problem, and you can address things by moving with them. Do something unusual. Do the opposite of what you normally do. Get out of your comfort zone, but maybe not too much. However, why don't you take your problem for a walk? Why don't you have lunch with it? Why don't you use your non-dominant hand to speak to it and ask it questions? Be like, hey, how are you doing? What do you want me to know? Why are you so difficult? Confront and be with things in the way that you normally don't. I think that's the essence of creativity, is definitely looking at things and being curious about them. It's like, well, let me just see. How does this look like? Oh, but what if I turn it this way? Oh, interesting. But what if I look at it this? What do I really see here? So being with things in a different format, and that could also look like creating options. Like the thing that I tell to my clients sometimes when they are really stuck is like, what are the 5 different options you can create? And they're like, well, I don't know. I was like, can you run away from this? I'm like, yes. I was like, but I wouldn't. But I was like, you can, right? I was like, yeah. I was like, okay, write it down. I can run away. Okay. Can you tell to somebody to fuck off? They're like, no, but technically, yes, you can. Okay, great. Give yourself the permission to do that. Go as wild as you can with your craziest ideas, with your options. I don't know, dress as a man. I can go, I can swim with this problem. I can just whatever options that are available. And I promise you, giving yourself unlimited possibilities and just seeing and allowing it, even in your imagination, and imagining things will reframe it. And then you'll see that afterwards, all this madness, you'll start seeing clarity, because it'll shift your mindset from the scarcity survival mentality into expansion. And you'll be able to say, well, actually, hold on a second. Now that I don't have this tunnel vision of survival, I can actually think about it properly, and I have access to my different parts of my brain, right? I can come up with, actually, wait a second. This is a solution I haven't seen before, but it's so simple and so direct. And that comes again, being with the difficulties from different perspectives in different ways. Whether you write it down in options and imagine it, whether you literally want to dance with it, roll on the floor with it, have lunch with it, whatever it is. So I recommend, for creative process, go towards it and be with it in the ways that you normally wouldn't be with it. And you can also write to me and I'll send you an exercise, a creativity exercise that will probably, most likely, give you insights that you can't see yet.
Thank you so much, Marina.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this interview slash session. I'm sorry I've been trained that way. Can't do nothing
I love it.
about it. And yeah, I hope to have some other conversations, maybe touching on different topics in more depth. So today was like an introduction to the method, your story, and it's super inspirational. I'm a true ambassador of the method. And
Lucky me.
yeah,
Thank
also wishing to expand and bring creativity to every household, every city. So there are spaces, like public spaces, available to everyone to do those practices. Would be amazing.
Well,
Yeah,
that's why
so-
we have creative facilitation training, creative facilitator training. That's a more accurate way of saying it. Yes, thank you. Thank you for this interview. And by the way, I have been absolutely terrified doing this, but in your safe space and really welcoming energy that you create, I definitely appreciate I felt inspired and held, and what a joy to be here. Thank you once more.
Thank you so much. And let's close the space.
Let's do that.
How would you like to do that? Maybe just one word. How do you feel?
I feel at peace.
I feel inspired. Thank you, Marina. We kind of exchanged our qualities now, created this.
Yeah. Thank you.
The peaceful and the inspired together.
To be continued.
To be continued. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.